How you doing, folks? Welcome back to the StingyTrigger tabletop. Trigger here to do a review of an excellent full-size service pistol, the H&K VP70Z. As always, here in the StingyTrigger project, we like to start off with a little bit of history when we can. So today we're talking about the VP70, and as you can probably guess by its 70 designation, it was a model that was introduced in 1970. It was initially designed in 1968 when Heckler and Koch looked around the marketplace and saw the success that Armalite and Colt were having with rifles like the AR-15 and the M16. And they said to themselves, well, if we can produce a pistol that has a polymer frame and takes advantage of space-age materials, we could be the very first to market and make ourselves a mint. And that's essentially what they decided to try to do with the VP70. Unfortunately for H&K and the venerable VP70, that didn't quite work out because the market was simply not ready for a polymer-framed pistol. Now I know what some of you guys are thinking, Glock fans especially. I thought the Glock was the first polymer-framed pistol. Well, the Glock was first designed in 1982 and really hit the market in 1983. So depending upon where you're counting from, the H&K VP70 beat the Glock 17 to the market by at least 12 and as many as 15 years. Nevertheless, it served well in a variety of distinctions, mostly civilian, but on occasional use in military and police forces, primarily in Europe, where they released a total of 3 variants of this particular handgun. There's the Z version, which you see in front of me on the tabletop here. The Z stands for Civil, or civilian. The M version, which stands for militaire, or military version. And the IMI version, which shot a different 9mm cartridge. The Z and M versions shoot a standard 9x19 Luger cartridge, whereas the IMI version shoots a sort of odd duck, the 9x21 cartridge, and that was primarily sold in Italy, where the use of the 9x19 is restricted to military and police only. As a result, the IMI version, they only sold about 400 of them, and ultimately the line was discontinued. However, the Z and M versions sold fairly well in Europe and decently well here in the United States. Now, the VP in the beginning of the designation, and I'm about to slaughter this here because I don't speak a lick of German, but if I'm pronouncing this correctly, stands for Vollautomatische Pistole, or fully automatic pistol. Now, before you're saying, holy crap, I can get a fully automatic civilian pistol, hang on a second. The fully automatic part was only available in the M military option. The Z version is a standard double action only, semi-automatic function handgun. The M version came with an additional plastic buttstock that would affix to the back end of the pistol at the bottom of the actual grip, and it interfaced back here right below the striker. The buttstock doubled as a holster, and it was intended to go for a lot of the carbine market, the handgun market in the military, where a lot of armed forces wanted their non-frontline personnel to have access to at least a select fire weapon, but wanted something small and light enough for them to carry around during their duties, which essentially were not frontline combat. So for your truck drivers, for your pilots, office personnel, and so on that were required to be armed near the front lines. So you would essentially carry around the handgun and the magazines in this buttstock, remove the magazine, load the handgun, and then affix the buttstock to the end. And with the military version, that gave you a single round, standard, double action only semi-automatic fire mode, or a 3-round burst capability. The 3-round burst shot at a blistering 2,200 rounds per minute. It certainly lived up to its name of fully automatic. Nevertheless, it never really caught on. in the militaries, a lot of the militaries had standardized on their sidearms, and with the ever-shrinking size of assault rifles, simply issued those anytime non-frontline personnel needed a weapon to carry out their daily duties. The carbines by that time had largely been discontinued from military use by the early 1970s, and as a direct result, the market wasn't there, even though H&K thought that it was. So nevertheless, they continued to produce this pistol up until 1986, when it was discontinued. And again, it sold fairly well, as it did have a lot of really radical design features, especially given when this pistol was first introduced. When it comes to innovation and features, there are some features that we nowadays call irritating because they were nods to the protectionist movement at the time in the late 60s and early 70s, most notably being the cross-block safety here. When the safety is engaged, you can't pull the trigger. When it's unengaged, you can pull it. And a double action only with an additional safety, that's overkill in my and a lot of firearm enthusiasts' opinion. Another safety feature, if you will, was the magazine release at the bottom of the pistol. When you pull this little lever here, notice there's no magazine release up here, it's down on the bottom. The magazine will in fact pop free, but unless you're holding that lever in place, the magazine doesn't drop completely out. So you either have to pull it out by hand or use two hands to hold it in order to get the magazine to drop. Again, a nod to the protectionists. There are, however, some extremely innovative features in the gun that are positives, the most notable being the polymer frame. It's a high-density, black plastic polymer frame. The first one like it. It's very smooth, it's very well manufactured, and it is a little bit top-heavy because it's used a basic gas blowback system. Kind of looks a little bit like a high point, although not quite so ugly. And it was a striker-fired pistol, which was somewhat unusual for the time. Everything else on the market, I shouldn't say everything, most things on the market that were mainline pistols, be they revolvers or military pistols such as the 1911, still used a hammer. Another feature that was extremely innovative is the sighting system. See if I can get this lined up for you. You see that nice clear sight picture there, that nice front sight sticking through our V-notch sight? It's not actually a front sight blade. This double front sight blade is actually forged into the slide of the handgun and then simply polished down, leaving the parkerizing running through the trough in the middle of this U-shaped protrusion here. So it creates the illusion of there being a front sight blade without there actually being a front sight blade on the weapon. Another thing that was highly innovative for the time was the takedown system. A lot of pistols of the day would require practically an armorer's bench to do any kind of serious maintenance or overhaul. The VP70 used a single point takedown, not too dissimilar from, again, a Glock or a SIG, but preceding it to market by a decade and change, as much as a decade and a half for many designs. And in this particular design, you simply pull this pin down, it unlocks the slide, which you can then pull all the way back, lift up, and off. And the entire internal workings of the pistol are exposed. You've got all forged German steel components and a lot of features on the inside that we're familiar with as well nowadays in a polymer framed pistol. So you have metal internals set in a polymer frame with metal guides for your forged steel slide, complete with a striker assembly that you can disassemble in order to perform maintenance and repair on the firing pin. Going back together is the exact same thing, just in reverse. Done. We're back together. We're back in action. Couldn't be simpler. And overall, a great design feature. Now, as to materials, I touched on it briefly. These are extremely high quality materials, all forged German steel, high quality polymers. The magazines themselves are all blued steel magazines. They're that classic H&K double feed lip style magazine, which is great because it makes it not only easy to load, like when you have gloves on, but it also makes it extremely easy for rounds to peel off, which is important, especially seeing as this is not quite a side-by-side, but very nearly a side-by-side magazine. Which brings us, as long as we're talking to magazines, to cartridge capacity. Each one of these magazines, the original model came with 2, holds 18 rounds plus 1 in the chamber. So even by comparison to a lot of today's modern pistols, you have an excellent available round count in this pistol if you choose to carry it. It's a full-size pistol. It does have the weight issues associated with that, but you can get a full 19 rounds plus additional 18 rounds in each magazine you're willing to carry. That's a lot of firepower. Even today's Glocks and SIGs, you don't get those numbers, generally speaking, without a +1 or +2 base plate on the bottom of the magazine. Straight from the factory, all steel, 18 +1 rounds. Which moves us on to ergonomics. Well, when it comes to size and weight, it's not that bad. It's certainly on par with any other full-size pistol, and weight-wise is not that bad, especially considering what else was available at the time. It clocks in at 28.9 ounces, and while a little bit heavy by today's standards, especially when you compare it to a Glock 17, which again clocks in around 23.5, 24 ounces, it's a little on the heavy side, but is certainly nowhere near the 32, 36, or 48 ounces you'll see coming out of things like revolvers or all-steel pistols that were available, certainly at the time, and even today. The fit and feel, however, is excellent. As I said, it's a very high quality of manufacture. One of the downsides, though, is as this was pretty early, there isn't a lot of aggressive stippling. There's no checkering along the back strap or the front strap of the handguard. There is a little bit of texture, if you guys can see that, but it's not much. If this were going to be an everyday carry gun for me, I would definitely consider getting a slip-on rubber grip, maybe putting in some more aggressive surfaces here, some grip tape, some stick-on grip panels, something. The other feature that, again, this was sold as a safety feature back in the day, but is seen as an irritating feature nowadays, is the trigger pull. This gun, as I said before, is double action only and has a 20-pound trigger pull. You heard me right, double action only and 20-pound trigger pull. Again, that was sold as a safety feature back in the late 60s, early 70s, so that you could say, well, if your kid does get it and does manage to take the safety off, chances are little Johnny or little Susie's not going to be able to pull this 20-pound trigger on a gun that they can barely get their hands around. We as firearms enthusiasts, however, used to 7, 10, 3-pound trigger pulls in single action only, tend not to like that a whole heck of a lot. And although it was billed as a safety feature, it really detracted both from sales and use of the pistol widespread, especially in the early 1970s. Alright, we'll come back in part 2 here to talk about track record and value. See you there.